Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. My name is Saurabh Gupta. Let's get this thing started. We are recording it, so we'll definitely share a link of the recording later on. My name is Saurabh Gupta, and we are talking about Fields Gone Wild, CRM data governance. Thank you so much for joining. I am today joined by Velu and Prasanna. They are both extremely talented folks, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our backgrounds. But before we do that, like all good Salesforce partners, this is a disclaimer. None of this is legal advice. We will talk about privacy, compliance, governance, and all of that. And these are our professional, personal point of views based on our prior experiences. They don't represent our employers. So again, this is all informational only. I am the co-founder of Cloud Compliance. We are a Salesforce App Exchange ISV partner, and we have data mass, data retention, right to be forgotten, portability based App Exchange products, 100% native. That's what we do. You can learn more about us at cloudcompliance.app. I spent about 7 years at Salesforce. My background is primarily enterprise architecture, and I have a design degree, and I am a problem solver based in Chicago. All right, that's on me. I will do a quick rundown of the agenda, talk about our other two presenters, and then we'll move forward from there. So really the idea today is me, Velu, and Prasanna went through a lot of back and forth. And what we have done is we have taken a sliver of governance, because governance is a really, really large topic. And what we wanted to talk about today was just in general about governance, the trends that are happening, what's changing, the new level of complexity, and what does it mean for Salesforce and for CRM. Prasanna is going to share a really great perspective on it. I'm so glad we have her. Extremely seasoned point of view on data governance. And then we'll talk about what are the challenges, and Velu works for an organization that has about 10 Salesforce orgs. So a lot of complexity that they're dealing with. And he's seeing that firsthand from people in the trenches, from his team and such. So we'll talk about what forward-looking Salesforce customers are doing, some use cases, some examples. And the third part of this, which I'm extremely interested in, and I think everyone here would probably benefit immensely from, is Velu and Prasanna will talk about data governance maturity. How do you get started? What can you do without boiling the ocean, without spending millions of dollars, which none of us have these days, fortunately. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that. And then please put in your questions if you have any on the chat. I think some of my colleagues reached out to people who are attending. We do have some questions. We'll definitely cover all of that. That's the agenda for today. Anything that you find that we are missing, and we are definitely missing a bunch of things, please do add in questions that, in the chat here that you'd like to see, and we'll try to cover them eventually. So this webinar is first of a series. We want to cover some other topics. We've not scheduled dates and the content presenter, things like that. But we would do a sequel to this, which is really around records gone wild, and talk about explosion of data and how do you look at it? How do you look at backups, archiving, resiliency, just the crazy, explosion of data that's happening with organizations. Today, we are talking more at a field level and some of those things, but eventually we want to talk just beyond data model and related governance into this whole management of data from a size, complexity. The third sequence of that would be orgs gone wild. We'll talk a little bit more about data governance from a multi-org perspective, some of the complexity around it. If there are things beyond that you'd be interested in, please do put it in the comments or raise it to us in Q&A, and we can definitely, address that. We will be putting these webinars out on our LinkedIn page, on Cloud Compliance's LinkedIn page, and on CRM Center of Excellence LinkedIn page. So with that, let me give you a little bit of introduction of our illustrious speakers today. I have Velu Palani, who is the Executive Director at HCHC, and they are part of the Blue Cross Blue Shield. He's spent about 20 years in the industry, manages a pretty large CRM Center of Excellence and a team there. And what I really like about Velu's perspective is this is not a vendor talking to you. This is not a consulting company talking to you. This is someone in the trenches, much like a lot of folks on this call. And this is someone who's talking about the reality of day to day, how things need to happen. What are the challenges that they say? I think it's going to be immensely good for everyone on this call to hear firsthand from, Salesforce customers. And then we also have Prasanna on this call, and Prasanna looks at data and analytics. She's the head of data and analytics for Volkswagen of America. She brings an extremely rich and diverse background of, B2C organizations, a lot of different kind of things around data governance. The thing I so like about Prasanna's perspective and the opportunity I had to immensely learn from her is that it is pragmatic. You want to hear from people who are practitioners, and you don't want this fluffy high level advice of go boil the ocean. And she brings a very, very pragmatic point of view. With that, I am going to turn it over to Prasanna.
Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, it was so kind of you to be introduced by Saurabh. Data governance, being 25 plus years in data and analytics space, how complex and an important topic often the organizations struggle with. And over the last a decade, I would say things have shifted dynamically, right? Like it's no more, it's not a costly a proposition, but it's almost unaffordable if you don't tend and carry your data governance. Let's take a look at like or these numbers are alarming, right? Like it started with GDPR, roughly around 1.65 billion in fines. We started in US like the CCPA, CCPRA, and even as we speak, there are 4 states lined up to join the data privacy this year. And Gartner has a data point or research. Technically, our by 2025, 80% of customer data will be governed or highly regulated by data privacy, which brings in super complications in terms of how we manage data and be able to govern it with utter care. Again, on the second point, you and I, being on an end user and a customer, know that like with this digital transformation, the explosion which has happened with whether online, social media, we don't have the trust like when we share our information to vendors and are paranoid about like, hey, either they're misusing our data, it's like a trust which is being broken. And it's super important because it's going to like erode the brand loyalty. And that's why it's critical gaining the customer's trust. It's going to just cost us that much. And the third point is in an average, the data breaches over the year 2021 had a highest average of 4 million plus, and that is significant, right? And this all clearly shows us the fact that data governance is not an option anymore, but it's a key enabler for your business. It's just not just the fines and the security breaches, but think about your customer loyalty, which drives the whole penetration and your bottom line. So this clearly shows the metrics that it's no longer an option, right? Having said that, let's take a look at like how we have progressed from the legacy data governance. So I'm sure majority of you have heard about the regular data governance about like cataloging your data assets, having the lineage, data quality, the integration, classic old stuff. Even that is a table sticks in most of the organizations, even as we speak today. We had some level of regulatory compliance, which is again was very local to that particular business, whether it's a healthcare like HIPAA or PCI compliance for cards. It wasn't in that lens of like really overarching needs of compliance, right? And these were just in play even last 7 8 years. But fast forward with the GDPR and the whole data privacy and data security landscape, we can clearly say that it soon we started to see an emerging trends in all of the other aspects of the data privacy and data security. And me being a practitioner, if you ask me like a 10 year or 7 10 years back, we didn't have like data subject request or data processing and residency. Never was like notices and consent management was not that important. Privacy by design, I would say that is like another whole day topic. I think we all can talk about it. It's just that it has exploded. It has exploded to that extent. And take a look at the incident response or the privacy risk assessment. And clearly, you could see that it has progressed from a very table stakes of just get to know about your data assets, just govern to an explosion of emerging areas because of the tech space, right? Due to digital transformation, there are new techs which is driving lot of these most of the concerns with data privacy and the data security aspects of it. And hence, I just want to draw the parallel as well. You see those C-level executives, it is important to have an executive who's going to be driving these aspects for the organization. And these roles has just evolved in the last 2 3 years. I mean, even me as a CDAO function, it's very new. And you can clearly see that not one executive can take an ownership of all the three aspects, right? And that comes with the complexity of the who owns what. And I think that is the key challenge. With that, I will exactly give it over to Velu, who can really talk about how this challenge is like has transpired in the Salesforce area.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Saurabh, Prasanna. And data governance is a big challenge for all of us. And the word governance itself means a lot. So, where do you start? Where do you begin? Where do you check? How do you check? I've been working with Salesforce since 2000. In the old Salesforce, I think 6 7 years ago, or maybe 17 or 16, they moved from legacy to lightning. I don't know why they put the name lightning, but they have a legacy to lightning. In the legacy world, the data, when I started, you wouldn't have more than 10, 15 tabs in Salesforce. I don't think there was not even a sales or service cloud. There is just cloud application which hosted the information where you would store your customer information. Lot of information may not be even customers, maybe leads or prospects. You just simply store information to track your activities, possibly track your opportunities, and maybe you connect with the backend systems such as SAP and Oracle. And it was purely for sales. That's how it started. And then eventually it started moving to the service side of I don't want to go to the deep side of how Salesforce evolved. But when the data in Salesforce in the previous world, in the previous era, I would say, before Lightning, it's all about basic customer information. But if you look at the current data landscape, we pretty much store everything. And Salesforce, as a CRM platform, it is compliant with all the compliance laws that you're supposed to have, whether it's GDPR and HIPAA. If it's a financial services, it has its own compliance requirements. Because the platform meets lots of the regulatory compliance, customers are starting to store very sensitive information on Salesforce. So if you think about the way Salesforce evolved, basic customer information to sensitive consumer slash consumer customer information. And that information, not only we are storing in Salesforce, we are augmenting to it. And oftentimes, some companies even use that data as a system of record. So then you can see the importance of all the data and the sensitivity. So the information that you store in Salesforce, it was primarily uh, internal users, and then they connected with the internal users, like such as Salesforce, I mean, salespeople, probably service folks. Then they started connecting with the backend operations, and that, like personal teams where the analytics involved, they started connecting. But in 2021, 22, 23, the data goes across the globe. It could be partner, it could be a vendor, it could be anybody. It could be even a patient coming to your website, logging into directly to Salesforce using portal or communities. So look at the way that data storing, the data residency evolved in the last 23 years that Salesforce been in place. So then what does this mean? You don't use Salesforce just for sales, service, and marketing. This is all your strategic platform fueling digital transformation. So now all the things that are happening, the questions that we have to ask ourselves is your Salesforce data governance keeping up with the changes that are happening? So when you know It's not only the data accessibility, the security protection, all those things are changing. If you just click a couple more pointers. So look at the data model and the change in which transforms or moves in the speed in which that we cannot even imagine. So these are some statistics, and this is not exactly my statistics. It is actually from one of our partners' sites. And it is, if you see number of time your Salesforce schema changes in a year, 12 to 24 times. At the same time, this is one of the partners that we took this information from, Elements Cloud. Maximum custom fields seen in a Salesforce org is 20,000. I am not surprised. I've been working in this field for 22 years, and currently I manage a very, very large environment with thousands and thousands of users. I am not surprised in 1 hour, 20,000 fields. If my memory serves, you can have 600 custom fields, but if it's a 600 fields, if you have a 10 objects, 10 times 600, it's 6,000. Salesforce has got hundreds and hundreds of objects. So literally you can mess things up. At the same time, you can configure such a way that customers or your users can actually leverage the platform. It depends on how you use it. And finally, the average weekly data changes in a typical org, it's 155,000. This is once again the statistics that we got from the partner. So the point is the data residency requirement is changing so fast. The data model is changing fast. People accessing the information 24 by 7 is changing. Now, how are you keeping up your data governance? That is the question that we should ask. Let's continue to explore how we can mitigate that. If you have so many fields happening, see the data governance, as I said, there is a huge topic. We cannot just cover this in 1 hour. So I can only take a subset of the data governance for the Salesforce or CRM. We will talk about few topics here, right? One, ensure your data governance addresses it. And in terms of policies based on object and data model, this is where the challenge that we are facing, right? Your data governance, does it address? But what is it addressing? You need to have policies and procedures to make sure that you have data governance across the company at the same time within your CRM or a Salesforce. And then other thing that you want to do, you need to make sure that you have the right security. If you ask me as a head of COE for an organization, what is the number one thing that I'm worried about? People accessing the data that they're not supposed to access. And we all know it's if once you have access to data, the data can be exported, copied, or even screenshot and printed. We need to make sure that the security is well protected and comply with the GDPR, all these regulations. This is changing. I'm in the healthcare industry. I constantly get requirements to protect the information or make changes or be compliant with the states. And each we have a federal requirements, we have state and local requirements. We need to make sure that we are completely protecting that. All these things can be accomplished. Salesforce gives you that capability, right? Everybody knows data classification, categorization. These are the two things that you can do. You can make it. You don't have to wait for the company to give you the overarching CRM data governance, but you can at least take few steps to do this work.
Great point, Velu, if I may interject here. So I'm also looking at some of these that have come in the chat and in some of the comments around how many number of fields you can have, right? You can have 500 in enterprise, 800 in unlimited. Thanks, Jonathan. But in addition to that, you have App Exchange packages. They can add fields, right? We are a vendor. We have objects. We are adding more fields. You have other packages that are extending your current models and adding their own fields to it. Now, the challenge, all of this stuff is your data model keeps on changing, which Velu was talking about. And if you look at some of the things you mentioned, right? Security, governance, compliance. Today, a lot of that happens on the data model. You would say, these 40 fields on your contact are HIPAA sensitive, are confidential, PII, PHI. But somewhere, Salesforce teams are adding more fields. Your business wants more fields. Your new app exchange package adds more fields. And like literally, you write a governance policy, you enforce it, it's obsolete the next day because a new release comes in and you have a whole set of new fields. And that is, I think, the challenge that, when you look at all of this for governance, for security, for GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA, CPRA, this is a double whammy. Your regulations are changing, what Prasanna was talking about, right? Your data governance scope has significantly increased just in the last 5 years. GDPR is what, 2018. So really about 5 years old now. And that is one of the newer, toughest global regulation. And then the variants of it here in the US state level, California CPRA, Virginia CDPA, and all the other states that are coming up with their own. Here in Illinois, we are supposed to get a new one. We already have a biometric law. So a lot of these things are happening. And that's on the regulatory side. On the Salesforce side, all of this new cool capabilities, we are adding more field, more data, more app exchange packages, more capabilities, more integrations, more business functionality, householding, health, IoT data, wearable data, game data, vehicle data, right? Like click streams. There is so much of stuff that's coming together. And really the question that I find when Velu and Prasanna talk about it, as someone who's not, working at a Salesforce customer or employed there anymore, I think about this and I'm like, how do you make sense? How do you find a reasonable path forward without boiling the ocean, without shutting things down, without spending a huge amount of time, money, and effort? How do you really pragmatically move things forward? I'll take a minute here and see if Prasanna or Velu, you want to add anything else before we move forward.
I think one thing that this field's gone wild, as you said, Saurabh, in the beginning, data governance it's a pretty long journey. And there is, it's only a logical beginning and logical ending. Okay, I started it, now I finish it. It's a continuous journey. And we are today, the focus is all about focusing on the fields. How can you start from bottom up? And we took this as a fields gone wild as a topic. Focus on how to, at least if you are working in the field of Salesforce and you have responsibility to protect your information, you can go with the field level. But we are also trying to give you some kind of framework so that you get an idea how to go and approach it. But it all depends on how you want to take this and apply in your organization.
All right. With that, let's get into how do we solve this problem. What we found was a lot of customers we spoke to, a lot of customers my company Cloud Compliance had a chance to work with. Some of them are like large FANG type customers with 40, 50 orgs. And what we found is that a lot of them are doing things slightly differently. And the challenge they have is very much what we talked about. Since your data model is evolving so fast, your governance is not able to keep up. And every time you have organization that's trying to enforce governance, and it's just like, it seems like it's slowing down the progress we want to make. Because as Salesforce people, we are like, new features, new release, new stuff, DevOps, CI/CD, e-commerce, right? There is this push to get more and more, particularly with COVID, with economic, correction, all the stuff that's going on. So there is something really interesting in your Salesforce org today that you don't have to buy, you don't have to enable. It's sitting there. And, it would be very interesting to see how many of the folks on the call are using or aware of it. And it seems like tiny little things, but they can have a dramatic impact. And the next couple of slides are about that. And then we'll get into how do you actually, operationalize it. So on every field in Salesforce that you have in your Salesforce object standard custom package, you have data sensitivity level and compliance categorization. And this is really interesting in how it can kickstart your governance without significant amount of effort. So what data sensitivity does is it lets you tag, fields with these sort of sensitivity. Are they public? Are they internal? Are they confidential? And this pick list that you see here, by the way, is editable. So you can add your own organizational interpretations of how you look at information and how you want to classify it and say. So what's unique here is you're applying this at a field level, not at the value. So you would say the account, number is confidential for us, right? Or the secretary's name for a contact is internal information only. And you can apply that kind of tagging today. So you can do this today in your org. You go back, look into setup org field, and you can do that. The second part of this is compliance categorization. And this is really what can then drive your compliance and regulatory controls and as it pertains to Salesforce. So what happens here is that you can say that these particular fields fall under the purview of HIPAA. And this is your internal company interpretation, or for GDPR or PCI or COPA or CPRA. Again, in editable list, you can add your own versions. If you're in Canada and you want to apply the Canadian privacy law, please do. You can add those. And that way, you have this metadata around your object. So yeah, this is great. I can do this. I'm still not seeing how it moves my data governance forward. So let's dive into what real world problems can this solve and what customers are using to solve this today. So you can have a policy where you may say, hey, anything that's talking to my Salesforce, APIs, ETLs, extraction of data, pushing data into Salesforce. Only specific systems can query, extract, or update information, especially if it is confidential, right? So very classic example, if you're in healthcare, you may say, hey, I have systems that are HIPAA certified and that are not, PCI certified and not. And a system that is not internally, we think it's worthy to have HIPAA information, we should not send that here. And you can tell people who are building integrations, say, you're pulling data from Salesforce, don't pull these 150 fields from contact because they have HIPAA sensitive information. My downstream system may not be certified for that kind of information in usage. Great. I went in next day, added 50 new fields. Now you don't know what to do. And that's when metadata comes in. And what you can then do is you can have policies that require your integrations to first query field level metadata. Even before you query the actual data in an object, you would go, give me all the fields on contact that are not categorized as HIPAA. And then you can send that information. And it's a very nuanced difference. But the minute you do that, you have all of a sudden disentangled your governance from your data model, because your data model will change, will evolve. Your governance policies can now participate into this whole evolution without becoming a roadblock to it, right? It's not slowing down your digital transformation because you have data classification. As long as you apply classification and categorization, all of these integrations, API, if you're writing custom API on Salesforce, you're writing Apex, connecting through Heroku, AWS, MuleSoft, whatever you're doing, instead of binding it to the object and attributes of an object or fields, you are now using the metadata to drive it, all your policy, all your security, all your guidelines. So here is a real world example. We are a product company. We do data retention. We actually built this stuff into a product because one of our very large FANG customer uses this. They apply policies like this. They are going to say, hey, if I am doing a data retention on account, any account record that has restricted or confidential information and has a compliance categorization of GDPR, if any of those fields on an account record are populated, wipe them out if we have had no interaction, delete them, mask them, obfuscate them, right? So you can apply these kind of things to be compliant with InfoSec policies. If you are running a large organization, even if you're a small or mid-size, this is insulating you from changes. Every new development that's happening, great. Apply a categorization, apply a sensitivity, just basically tag them. And you can literally do things like these in a matter of minutes. You can go right after this event, go into your Salesforce object setup field, and you can change it, edit, change it. And you can do this really, really quickly. And then when you use products that are intelligent enough to do this kind of stuff, you can leverage it. You can apply this for data privacy requests. If you have to deal with the California laws, if you have to deal with GDPR because you have EU residents as your customers, you can apply this data sensitivity to remove information if there is a data deletion request. You can apply this for portability request. If someone says, hey, give me my data, you have this sensitivity level applied where you're like, say, what is internal? What is confidential? What can I give? What can I not give? And by doing this, you have again freed yourself from the changes in data model. As long as those fields are classified and categorized, we don't really care. A similar thing which we are doing, which is on our roadmap, is for data masking. We do data masking. If you have sandboxes, you can use this product. It's free for 4 objects and limited record. But it's the same idea there. For every one of these things, we want to go down this path because it's like, hey, you just want to say, hey, mask PII. Anything that says, this PII tag, mask it. I don't even want to tell you what. Just go in, have the intelligence to figure all that out, wipe all of that. And that is the whole intention with this. Whether you're looking at doing custom integration, whether you're looking at internal systems, whether you're looking at app exchange packages or third-party vendors, all of that you can do. So there's a question in here around Salesforce Shield. Actually, Shield leverages this too. If you're using Shield, you have to put in the effort to do sensitivity and compliance categorization. It uses it. And we can probably address that in a future session as well. So this is
does your product also encrypt when we try to say confidential?
No, we only do masking. So we do obfuscation. I mean, we do support encryption, but we don't natively do.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. All right. So really, bottom line is what you're doing here is these metadata-based policies are freeing you from data model changes. And what we'll do next is in another 2-3 minutes, I'll hand it over back to Vipul and Prasanna, and they will talk about, this is all great. How do I do it in real world? But before that, one final point on this is most organizations today have some variant of this, right? You have data strategy, data governance team, some processes, some tech solutions, some awareness, all of that, right? And you also have this thing that's happening down at the bottom, right? In the trenches, you're trying to apply what's the lineage, all this documentation, who owns it, how do we process, how do we secure, how do we use, how do we access, where all does it move? And the challenge for a lot of organizations, particularly when you think about governance, is that this layer here to this layer down here, there is a lot of translation loss, right? Organizationally, you would say, I have these policies. But when it comes down to translating to people who are in the trenches, I'm a Salesforce admin, architect, developer, business analyst, I am in the Salesforce product owner or one of those groups, and I am responsible for releases. I'm looking at this stuff and I'm only doing whatever kind of makes sense to me, or I'm looking for more clarification from them, or I feel like this is obstructing my, my progress forward because I'm getting end of the year, my boss is going to look how much stuff I delivered. And a lot of this is not making sense from that perspective to me today. And this is kind of where that missing link comes in by applying metadata to it and then using that to let the whole lot of what these, these initiatives, these people, these processes are trying to do, you actually facilitate a lot of this down here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Velu to talk a little bit about how we do it. And more importantly, like, is this boiling the ocean or do I wait for a larger thing to happen? How do I move forward from all of this? This is great. Saurabh came, talked, yeah, whatever, but I am tasked with the real world things to do. How does all of this come together for me? Velu, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So, Saurabh, Deepak has a question.
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Deepak.
Oh, is it okay if should I be asking now or should I only ask the questions at the end of the session?
Actually, yeah, we can, if you don't mind, if it can wait, maybe because we just have a few more slides and then we'll open it for Q&A and address the questions.
Oh, this is almost along the context. I just wanted to know. So when we're talking about data masking, are you guys even trying to make us understand about data seeding or it's only data masking?
Well, I was just using that as an example. We do data masking and I was using that as an example of we are also building this sort of data sensitivity, data categorization into the product so that customers, today what happens is for any of seeding, masking, whatever, right? You have to say, go to contact these fields, wipe out data or do something. And eventually you could just say, wipe out data or mask data wherever it is confidential, marked as confidential, because you want to take it away from an object and field to a metadata based policy. That's what I was saying. And we can talk more in detail in the Q&A.
Yeah, more in detail. Yeah, that's the most important context because seeding has a little different context when compared to masking according to some people, right? So sure. Thank you.
Cool. Of course. Velu, over to you.
Sure, thank you. So when we all have a different roles to play, Salesforce or any CRM, I don't know much about other CRM. I'm kind of, I would say stuck with Salesforce, but I think I'm fortunate to be working in one platform for a long time. So what I've seen in my experience, you don't wait. If you, let's say, who are all the people who do this data, the governance part of it? So you may not be writing the policy, but you may be able to contribute to write a policy. And so that is number one. The data governance policy is also there is an enterprise wide and there is a CRM, a subset of the governance. So regardless of whether there is a policy or not a policy, the best practice would be to you as an expert or a subject matter expert or a practitioner, if you're, let's say you are an architect, you are coming up with a solution, I highly recommend that your solution should always be part of a data governance component should be there. We all look at inbound systems, outbound systems, and how do we configure versus customize. It is an important part that if you are an architect, you are a product owner, and then if you're a CRM manager who is responsible for delivery, if you're a CRM COE leader, you can take some steps. So we did a survey. I think Saurabh did the survey. I wouldn't say that we did a survey. Thank you, Saurabh, to do that. So this survey says that many companies can take this first step. Saurabh had already explained what are those things you can do to protect your information. The governance, there are multiple components to governance. One is the data protection, accessibility, and you saw that one of the slides, the lineage and who accesses and what type of information, and then all this multiple areas that you do. Can you just go
Oh,
back?
sorry.
So if you see, majority of the people recommend that do these small steps, which Saurabh had already explained. I highly recommend the same thing. And I'm in the process of putting together a big data governance working with my teams, but it is the critical part. If you're a developer or anybody who's in that ecosystem of delivering value or a sprints, make sure that you take that first step. That's my recommendation as a first step.
So what we did is, we had a bunch of conversations and I was talking with Prasanna and she has a lot of experience with data governance. And I was like, from a Salesforce perspective, I don't know where to start and how do I do this, right? And I used to work at Salesforce. So I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of customers and now at Cloud Compliance I'm doing the same thing. It's like, how do you start small? I don't want to go to somebody and say, give me, millions of dollars and a whole team to do something. If I'm part of a smaller Salesforce team also, like within my sphere of influence in a Salesforce instance, what can I do? And, we came up with this idea of this ABCD, right? The first is awareness, which is kind of what we are doing here, right? You go back and you really ask yourself this question: is this for me? Is this for my organization? Is this the direction you want to go? And if you feel that the answer is yes, then you just do this literally with a very, very small group. You do not want to go or enterprise wide unless it's a small company. You do not want to go sell it to everyone. It just doesn't work that well. The beauty of the world we live in, the Salesforce environment, is we can do small things really, really quickly, show value, and then leverage that to do something bigger. And that's the idea here, right? You assess if this is going to work. You come up with some sort of a really small use case. You could literally pick 4 objects, right? I would right off the bat say contact, lead, account, opportunity. That's it. 4 objects. What does it take to apply data governance to it? And, you can actually extract that whole list from Salesforce and you can, work with a business, a BU owner, and you can literally just say, okay, here are my fields on contact. Let's talk about them. Here are 2 drop downs, one for categorization, one for sensitivity. What do we think this is? What do we think this is? And you can upload that back into Salesforce. Salesforce actually supports that. So you can export CSV and upload CSV of this. very, very quick to do. So you don't have to sit with the business owner and go field by field and set up. But you've done that, you have a case for this, some really small business case, and you can then show usefulness. If you're building APIs, you tell the API team like, hey, use the metadata. Even if you want to pull field specific, use the metadata to determine should you be pulling those or not. It could be something as simple as that. If you're working with some vendor, see if their product supports this and leverage that. The usual suspect that I see for business case is security, compliance. Those are like areas where there is always a pressing need. So if your organization has any kind of sensitive data, there may be really good ways to kind of show the business value. Once you've done this, you're able to show business value there. Then you have the opportunity to sort of take it to a broader level, have a consensus across the enterprise. If you're multiple orgs, try it across orgs and see if you can tie it to some larger enterprise-wide governance initiative. And that is kind of where now there's more momentum, there is more scale around it. And then what you want to do finally, this is the part that I think is extremely interesting and useful. If you find that the ABC tends well in the organization, by the time you get to really transform with something as simple as data classification, is that you incorporate it as part of your way of life in Salesforce. What that means is your business requirement document, your user stories, somewhere there, you start asking this question. If you're adding new fields, new data models, you ask those questions of what are these fields on these objects going to be? What is their categorization? What is their sensitivity? If you have a release checklist where you review, what new fields got added, what are the purposes, if you do any sort of a sanity check, you make it a point to kind of run a query or something to say, give me all the fields on these objects which don't have a classification. And you can run SOQL queries to find that. There is the field definition and entity definition objects that you can do SOQL query against and find out what is classified, not classified, what is categorized, not categorized, things like that. So that's on the Salesforce side, which is great. I'm a Salesforce guy. I can talk about Salesforce type stuff very easily, but there is a bigger endeavor. Maybe you don't have data governance. Maybe you want to know more about how do I do this in real world? I can do this in Salesforce, but what is the more organizational angle around it? And that is this portion next, which talks about how do you start this journey of 1,000 miles with, a few steps. So this is very classic on the data governance side of how does this come together. So I'm curious, Velu or Prasanna, if you want to talk about some of this.
Yeah, and again, as I said, like data governance is the classic sword situation. Like it's gains the least support in terms of funding, and people think it's just expensive and why we need it. And again, that's the specific reason that you need to be starting small. And even today, I get asked like, where is the outcome, right? The business outcome. And sometimes it's very hard to really establish like, hey, it is required so that you could create the trust and the quality. It's going to enable you to make better decisions and whatnot. Even within the Salesforce, you see a lot of AI and ML capability coming up, right? Like eventually you wanted to target like or have those contacts and communications more intelligently. So end of the day, you really need to start what works for your organization, and really need to come up with the metric and the outcomes, because that's always the challenge. Me being in the seat, like how do I prove the value and like how do we articulate the business value? So I think Velu, that's some classic thing which we discussed about, like how do you start? And I think as you have highlighted, you as a COE leader to start small within your COE, but kind of plug and play with your overall enterprise data governance, right? That's where I think it's going to be helpful to start small, but how can you eventually tie it up to the enterprise wide governance, but then it doesn't stop you to start proving small prototypes within your COE.
Yeah, so this is where I find myself sometimes speaking out loud. Like this is like you build a large building, and let's say an apartment building. If your focus is only renting the building and making money, not addressing that fundamental issues, cleanliness. Even if I'm actually moved from Chicago to Dallas, I even look at foundational problem. Foundation itself, if you're buying something, you need to look at the foundation so deeply. Maintenance, and you look at every aspect of managing and maintaining your. So let's say you are making money and you are looking at the ROI, and ROI is everything is about growing the business, not addressing the fundamental maintenance issue of this building, you will have a problem. And the CRM data governance comes something similar to that. It's a maintenance, but the maintenance should be done if it's a large building for big companies like us. It's very large building, large number of people live there, which are the users. Large amount of information is there, which are customer. If you are using handyman approach, we all know what handyman is. Handyman is, those who are in the US, we use quite a bit on a handyman approach. You just bring in somebody who knows how to do plumbing, they can do electricity, change the bulbs. That is not how you would want to address the data governance. It has to be more seasoned engineers knowing how to do the data governance and properly so that at the end of the day, you can be compliant. At the same time, unless the governance is there. So let's look at the poor data governance. What happens if you don't have a governance? I don't want to go in there. But if you have a poor data governance, the biggest cost of losing data or cost of operating the business, the risk that the penalty that you are likely to be paying to the regulators, and even the user adoption, customer experience, all those things will directly be related to the governance, the data governance. So that is how, if I am the COE leader, in this case I am, I would take that as my business case build so that I can get the funding and continue to operate. So that's metrics and the outcomes, and then the business impact. As I said, these are the business impact that you should take it into consideration and work with your leadership and make sure that you have the right funding to the data governance.
True, true. Well said. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm a big proponent of starting small. I think, I've spent a lot of time in enterprise architecture, and most large initiatives have a terrible time to get to success. They take too long. And by the time they can get to their perceived value, economic changes, business model changes, mergers happen. Like a lot of internal dynamics of organization and the larger, world around us changes. And it's change, and that pace of change is getting faster than it ever was in the past. And what I like about these two slides that we were looking at is that there is a sense of pragmatism here, right? If you're attending this, there is a really good chance that you are either in some of these positions or these people are in your circle of influence, right? So you can start with a small team. It could be a pilot, and you can define certain metrics. You can measure those outcomes, and those could be just, change in risk, right? Increase in compliance, increase in, better security so that you have lesser incidents. And you may find some love in those functions, right? Your legal, your compliance, your finance, your CISOs. A lot of those folks may find this useful, and they may then back you up because they will go, okay, we can see the value of this. And then you can leverage that to, to sort of get a bigger buy-in. And that's what these two are. Do you want to add anything before I open it for you?
No, I think I'm good. The people can always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I do have live, so I will take time to respond.
Yeah.
I won't respond right away, but certainly you can reach out to Saurabh's team. They can help you faster than I can, but I'm happy to address. But in the interest of the time, Saurabh, maybe we can take some questions.
Sure. All right. Prasanna, sorry, I forgot to ask you. Anything you want to add before we go to Q&A?
No, I think, yeah, let's open it up for folks to ask some questions.
All right. Who had asked me a question earlier, and I said that, was it Vishal or someone? I can't remember. But anybody? Deepak, I don't know if I'm not seeing him here. Anyone on the call? Let me go look at some of the questions that were asked. Sybil mentioned, so would an architect do this in a larger organization? Who's best to do with maintenance and how often? Yeah, so Sybil, thank you for asking. I have been an architect for far too long in my career. So I kind of see that as a very natural thing for architects to do. But I also think that a lot of, a lot of companies, especially in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot of senior admins play that role, right? More and because on one hand, Salesforce has actually made some of the things more accessible, particularly with flows and others. And admins are now playing a much more vocal and leading role into those kind of conversations. So I definitely see this as coming from that. But I also see this largely coming from business also, right? Business, your business analysts or business architects, your project and program managers, all of those other functions that are now equally or sometimes more responsible for the success of Salesforce in an organization, they can play a role. And the part that has accelerated a lot of these things is just this, the onslaught of regulations. There is this flood of regulations, and you keep on reading about one coming out every other month. And, as more and more of these things come out, I think a lot of people within a Salesforce org, within a Salesforce team can play this role. And again, as I was mentioning earlier, so much of this is just raising awareness because like 90% of the people I talk to are not aware or are not doing anything in this direction. And it's a low hanging fruit. You're not buying anything from any vendor. And so if anybody on the call has a question, reach out to, either Velu, me or Prasanna.
I can also add one here. I've been following a lot of AI, the role of AI in data governance, especially CRM data governance. I mean, we have to do a lot of heavy lifting today. Eventually, the AI should help us to at least give some guidance and should do some mundane work of, okay, how do you start? Where do you start? And how do you make some quick plugging the hole quickly? Those things I think AI can help. This is my reaction to what is happening in the world of AI. I'm pretty sure AI will aid in the governance, but I don't know personally it's happening in the
Ab-
outside of Salesforce.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's where the whole data observability comes into like an end-to-end data lifecycle. And it is super important, right? Like it's like you could only do so much in terms of point-to-point integrations. Sometimes it becomes overly complex. And I truly believe in next 4 to 5 years, we really would see a lot of ML capability to be able to do some of those data operational quality checks, make sure the pipelines and those are not like it's not someone who's sitting in the ops to take a look at it, and it's super expensive, right? Like a lot of that it could cover when he talked about the apartment being dirty, like it can discover a lot of discovery could happen with AI ML. A lot of the remediation can be automated if we see the patterns. So absolutely, like with all that in play, I believe that next 5 years, data governance and the whole data observability space will be like having great solutions from AI ML. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted on the lighter note for people who are still on
Chat GPT.
it is there. But I want to say that, some more people are still on the call, more than 70 people. This picture you see, it was generated by AI engine. So nobody can do copyright on it, including Saurabh, who created, cannot create a copyright on it. It's a copyright by AI engine. So
Yes.
what AI can do is amazing. I think the data governance will have, hopefully, we will have some more help from the AI world.
Yeah. I mean, what's incredible about this picture is it is literally 15 seconds of you type in a command and it generated out both what we had in the front and in this. And I think, like Chat GPT, I think we need Gov GPT or something for data government. One other question that I'm looking at the chat, and Michael Clark asked, are there any integrations, drivers with data governance or other tools that would pick up these data sensitivity categorization on a field level? So, Michael, I think a part of it is vendor to vendor. We do some of this. We are building a lot of this into pretty much every product we have. And we have a roadmap to do these things. I'm sure there are other, vendors who are doing this. I don't know if predominantly, a lot of like AI type stuff is happening here. We tried doing some, like Einstein AI because we are all on platform. So we tried using it about 2 years ago and it didn't work very well for us, at least at that point of time, because I think Einstein AI at that point was more focused on, or maybe 3 years ago, it was more focused on, vision and some of the other areas and not some of the things that we wanted to do. And our intention was that can we read through data and start tagging fields as sensitive because the data in it looks like PII, PHI. Now that with newer technologies, it's possible. I'm just waiting for Salesforce to add more of that AI stuff on the platform and, allow us an API access that we can leverage. But today, only a handful of vendors do it. We happen to be one of them. Another question here is, and Michael, if you're on the call, please unmute yourself if you want to add more context to it. The amount of data in Salesforce is far less than ERP. So why do we need data governance in the first place? Well, I guess we did show a slide around, 20,000 custom fields added and 155 changes. And I think this question was asked by somebody earlier. And really just like for most organizations today, particularly in the post-COVID era, if we can call it this time, that there's been the explosion of data. Like literally everyone I know has multiple Salesforce.
I can probably add to it on this one. I have. Imagine if you are, the classic to lightning world are there right now, 10 years ago or even few years ago. The information that you gather was primarily, let's say 10 years ago. In the last 10 years, I mean, if you Google it, the data growth and all those things, personnel might have a lot more information on what the real data growth is. But in the CRM world, as we are communicating with a lot of different external systems and external constituents, such as your partners, vendors, and connecting with so many different types of people or organization from your organization. For that, you have to have that their information, even their basic information, should be in Salesforce. And what happens if you open up the communities or the experience cloud they have today? It is all about having their information in our system and giving them the access. So you don't want to give accidentally if your, let's say your partner is working with you on sales opportunities and you don't want to expose that information to accidentally competitor of the partner. So there is a lot of sensitivities going on. That is number one. The other thing that I would also look at data governance. Salesforce, I keep sounding like a legacy person. If you look at the history of Salesforce, I'm talking like historian, with some small amount of data, large amount of data. Couple of years ago, Salesforce completely shifted their focus from sales, service, marketing to industry solution. So they're changing the game. It's no longer I buy Salesforce for managing my sales and opportunities and accounts and so on. So if you are a new customer wanting Salesforce, you are very likely, if you're a manufacturing company, you will get manufacturing cloud. So they give you this industry solution. As you see that transition into the industry solution, what does SAP do? What does Oracle they do? They are ERP systems. And where is Salesforce going? They don't call themselves as ERP, but they are providing us industry solution. So there is a semblance, there's some similarities. So eventually that there will be a lot of data coming into Salesforce. In my experience in the last 10 years I've been working on, I've only monitored for about last 10 years. The growth of Salesforce or any CRM data is exponential. It's not even linear. And that is where you need the data governance. So we need to keep that in mind. It's not that anymore, it's not an ERP system. Hence, I don't think we should worry too much about it. It's about the data growth and the need to open up the system to multiple parties. I hope I answered the question.
I think so. And well said. So I just posted this message. If anyone, if we only covered a sliver here, but if there are other things that you would have liked to hear, please do put it here in the chat or feel free to unmute and, participate. I'm looking at another question, which is how do you approach data governance in the context of external integrations? How do you decide when to use external objects versus custom object versus data virtualization, etc.? And I think Tony asked this. So thank you, Tony, for asking. And I think this is one of those areas that I definitely would want us to cover in our, upcoming webinar around records gone wide, which is just the idea of this explosion of data.
Maybe I can answer that too. So we will
Sure.
go deeper, but just specifically to answering that. See, we also have to have some differentiation or delineation between data governance and architecture principles and architecture design standards. So these things could be more of a Salesforce architecture and enterprise architecture. How do you use external? When do you use external object versus? So this is it's kind of not necessarily a data governance. It's in between data governance and it is also between the architecture. So this happens to me in the organization. So we look at our architects and say, okay, hey, how do we do that? So, but even though the decision is from the architecture team, architects, the process of governing the data still needs to it still the governance needs to apply the data governance should apply to that process. This making decision is one thing, and make sure the data governance is applied in both places is the other thing. So it is the combination of architecture team and then the data governance team giving their guidance to make sure they're following the policies.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, that I also see this as partly both, right? Like, sure, I actually find the architecture part of it more left brain. I'm like, oh, it's easy, right? How integral is it to CRM? Do I need to do other things? Like, there are good technical reasons for why I want it or not. But I'm sure beyond that, there's probably also a significant data governance point of view on why this really a terrible idea. How many copies of records do I want? That kind of governance oriented thinking.
Yeah, I know. I think so. The one of the key principles for all the CCPRA or the data privacy is about data discovery. So you should be having mechanisms to discover what data is there in your platform, right? So at least I would say you will need to work with the data governance in terms of they should have an oversight or audit in terms of your data mapping and data discovery so that it, end of the day it is organization's risk which is sitting maybe people are not aware on of how huge a risk they are sitting on. So I would say that if your teams or data privacy teams are not working on it, that's an area that you should bring awareness to them. Say like, hey, do we know that accidentally we have like really even classified and like sharing data which we shouldn't be? So I would say they should at least have an audit function. Even as you as a CEO, you need to do something within your environment. But I think there should be audits from data governance team or that perspective.
True. I think there's another question on from Monica. What are the different types of data governance in Salesforce? Okay, I have no idea how to answer this. I'm going to see if Prasanna or Vengu has a point. I don't know if there are different ways of data governance.
It's not different types of governance, but the various steps in the data governance. So step 1, step 2, step 3, we are all used to phase 1, phase 2. What is the step 1, step 2? So step 1 would be protecting the obvious. Make sure that your bare minimum something is there. And okay, so the way we look at it, because we also have the information security and so many folks that come after us, we want to make sure that there is at least defined policy is there. That's a step 1. And step 2, in whatever the defined policy you have, what are the things that you should do? It's a maturity curve. The governance is a maturity governance a curve. Is that right, personal? Am I saying it right? It is not. You're not going to do it overnight. Is that a
Yep.
fair statement? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. So when we look at the first step is to have a policy which is understood by people. It's not you write your policy and go implement. It has to be understood. And then within that policy, you define steps in which you take to get to the level that you want to go. So what is the level in which you want to go, which is acceptable by your internal auditing team, your security team, and also whoever needs to say that you are compliant. Until then, you have to keep going. So I
Yeah.
don't think there's a steps. There is no types. I think the steps, and then you reach where your auditing says that, yep, you are in compliant.
Yeah, and I think that's where the very first second slide, when you saw that various swim lanes having various responsibilities, the policy setting comes from your chief privacy officer. What is like the regulation says, and this is the translation for the regulations, and we need to be getting there. And there's areas where this, as a CISO, from a security infosec point, like data security is there. And that's why I'm saying, like, even though we're talking in the context of Salesforce, Salesforce is another transactional platform and your systems of record for your customer information, both as a consumer and producer of customer data. You need to know what type and what kind of data is available on the platform, and your chief privacy officer absolutely should be concerned about the data which is residing in the platform, and they are aware of you have taken these steps, like in terms of like classifying, and the sort of kind of mentioned about the metadata driven restoration deletion policy definitely helps. But I think those oversight comes from all these three swim lanes as you work as a OE leader with those three pillars, and make sure like they're all in alignment and they're aware of the steps being taken, so that at least, because end of the day, when you think about it, what gets you traction, if you see that, like, hey, legally, if you go to the legal teams or the compliance team, like the risk, they are going to be behind it and get it done. So I use the legal lens and bring it from that perspective of like it's no longer an option as a data owner. Like, no, there's some usage of this data. I want to hold on to these a little more. Like, the only lens I use is like, here's my partner in crime, my chief privacy officer. Here's where like we are having a significant operational risk sitting within it, and I think you just partner with your legal or your compliance department, then it becomes like it's not an option. You as a BU leader will definitely get that kind of attention from senior leadership as well if you partner with your chief privacy officer.
True. All right. I see another question here. Sorry, I'm just going up and down this chat from Enric. As I know, there's an open source tool. Don't remember the name. What that does the same. What does this different? Sorry, Enric, I don't have context. If you want to go off mute and ask that. Not sure if I'm following. All right, I'll move up. Where is it? This here. Arturo, what is the tipping point for using a field for type to an actual record type? Okay, I think this is definitely probably more architecture and configuration and less data governance. But I think fundamentally the click of a 15-second answer is, depending on how distinctive your business process is, you may use a different record type. That is how I've always thought about record types. I'm going to scroll down further. Yeah. Okay.
And
So
I want to be cognizant about time. So
agree. All right. Final, any other question, any suggestions anybody has? Was this useful, helpful? If you want to just put in the chat, go up mute, let us know. All right. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you, Tony. Thanks, Sabil. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time on this Friday. Have a great weekend. And thank you for attending. And thank you, everyone, Prasanna.
thank you, Saurav. Personal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great to have the discussion.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.